A cruel man left a dog to die, tied and silenced. He thought no one would find him. But high in the trees, ancient eyes were watching, and a wild justice was about to unfold. The pain began as a sharp, biting fire and had long since melted into a dull, unending ache. It was in his legs, where the thick, coarse rope bit into his flesh with every slight sway. It was in his jaw, where a filthy gag, stiff with dried saliva, clamped his mouth shut, muffling his whimpers into useless, choked puffs of air. Thirst was a demon clawing at his throat, a desert inside him. The sun, a merciless hammer in the vast, empty sky of Redwood Valley National Park, beat down on his white fur, which was now matted with dirt and sweat. His name was Tiko. He was barely more than a year old, a mix of Labrador and something smaller, with floppy ears and a trust in his heart that had, until yesterday, never been broken. The memory of the hand that had put the rope around his legs was a confusing blur of betrayal. It had once been a hand that offered scraps, that scratched behind his ears. Then, it had become a fist, and a shove into a cramped, dark space. The last thing he remembered before the rope was the slam of a car door and the fading growl of an engine, leaving him in a silence more terrifying than any noise. He hung upside down from the low, gnarled branch of an ancient oak, a grotesque pendulum marking the slow, agonizing passage of time. Flies, drawn by the scent of his fear and his wounds, buzzed a dizzying chorus around his head. Below him, the forest floor was a tapestry of dry leaves and dappled sunlight, a world he could no longer touch. His body had given up struggling hours ago. Now, he was just a weight, a silent surrender. Consciousness was a flickering candle flame, threatening to extinguish with every gust of dry wind. In the hazy moments between lucidity and darkness, fragments of another life floated by, the giggle of a small child, the feel of a soft carpet beneath his paws, the savory taste of a dropped piece of cheese. They were ghosts of a paradise lost, making his current hell all the more profound. He didn't know who had done this or why. He only knew the world had abandoned him. But he was wrong. He was not entirely alone. High above, in the colossal canopy of the redwoods that stood like silent gods over the valley, a different world existed. Here, in the green twilight, a troop of chimpanzees had made their home. For the last hour, they had been aware of the wrongness below. It was a disturbance in the ancient rhythm of the forest, a jarring note in the symphony of life and death. From her perch on a thick, moss-covered limb, Kala saw it most clearly. She was the troop's matriarch, a large female whose dark, intelligent eyes had seen more than 30 seasons come and go. Her face was a mask of deep lines and wisdom, her movements economical and deliberate. At first, she had dismissed the patch of white as a strange fungus or a discarded piece of trash left by the careless two-legs who sometimes trespassed in their world. But it moved. It swayed with a lifelessness that was not the way of the living. She shifted her weight, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her gaze sharpened, piercing through the layers of leaves. She saw the shape of it, a four-legged creature. Small. Helpless. And she saw the rope. Humans. The scent of their danger was a lesson learned in infancy. Her troop knew to be wary, to melt into the shadows when they heard the crackle of human feet or the sound of their loud, guttural speech. But as she watched the small, white form, something stirred within her, deeper than caution. A ghost of a memory, sharp and painful, surfaced. The image of another small body, covered in dark fur, that had gone limp in her arms years ago after a fall. The memory of a helplessness she had been powerless to fight. It was an old wound, one that had never fully healed. In the dangling creature below, she didn't just see a different species in distress. She saw a universal echo of that same suffering, the same silent plea that had once escaped the tiny life she had lost. Her gaze hardened, the soft lines of her face tightening with a sudden, unshakable resolve. The rhythm of the forest had been broken, and she was beginning to understand that it was up to her to restore it. Kala let out a sharp, resonant cry, a sound that was not of alarm, but of command. It cut through the afternoon haze, a summons. One by one, the other chimpanzees emerged from their various occupations of foraging and grooming, their dark forms materializing on the branches around her. They turned their heads towards the object of her intense focus. Zuko, the powerful alpha male whose massive shoulders and thick neck muscles rippled with strength, was the first to react. He stood on his branch, his hair bristling, and let out a series of low, guttural barks directed at the ground. He pounded his chest in a brief, intimidating display. To him, the scene below screamed of a human trap. The rope, the unnatural position of the dog, it was a signature of the cruelty his troop had learned to associate with the two-legged world. His instinct was clear: danger. Avoidance. Retreat. He grunted, a deep rumble of disapproval, shaking his head and refusing to look any longer. Several of the younger chimps, perched higher up, chittered nervously, echoing Zuko's apprehension. They mirrored his fear, peering down with wide, worried eyes before looking to him for guidance. They knew to trust his strength and his judgment in matters of survival. But Kala did not back down. She met Zuko's gaze, her own eyes unwavering. She let out a different call, softer this time, but with a clear, insistent tone. It was a sound of reason, not of fear. She gestured with her long, elegant hand, first towards the dangling dog, then towards her own chest. She repeated the gesture, a simple but profound piece of communication. That creature. It matters. To me. She then turned to Zuko and did something remarkable. She approached him not with a challenge, but with a gesture of supplication. She extended her hand, palm up, a sign of peace and respect. She groomed his shoulder for a moment, a political act of reassurance, acknowledging his strength while simultaneously asserting her will. Zuko's barks subsided. He looked from her determined face back down to the suffering dog, a flicker of conflict in his intelligent eyes. He was the protector, and his duty was to avoid risk. But Kala was the troop's conscience, its heart, and her will was not easily ignored. Convinced, or perhaps simply moved by the depth of her resolve, Zuko fell silent. He gave a short, sharp nod. The decision was made. The descent was not a chaotic scramble, but a display of coordinated, purposeful grace. They moved through the canopy like a troupe of silent acrobats, flowing from branch to branch. Zuko took the lead, his powerful frame moving with surprising agility, his eyes scanning the forest floor for any sign of ambush. A younger, nimble male named Pip scrambled to a lower vantage point, his sharp eyes acting as a lookout. Kala was the last to descend fully. She moved with a slow, deliberate calm that belied the urgency of the situation. She landed on the forest floor with a soft thud, the scent of pine needles and damp earth rising around her. Tiko, barely conscious, sensed the shift in the world. The ground vibrated with heavy footsteps. Giant, dark shadows fell over him, blocking out the sun. A primal terror, colder and sharper than any pain he had felt, seized him. These were not humans. They were huge, powerful, and wild. He squeezed his eyes shut, his heart hammering against his ribs, bracing for the final, violent end. But it didn't come. He felt a presence loom over him, and a strange, musky scent filled his nostrils. He dared to open his eyes a fraction. It was her. Kala. She was crouched beside him, her face inches from his. Her eyes were not filled with malice, but with an intense, unnerving curiosity. She made a soft, rumbling sound in her chest, a sound of reassurance. She reached out a long, black finger and gently, so gently, touched the rope on his leg. Tiko flinched, but the touch was investigative, not aggressive. She traced the path of the coarse fibers, her brow furrowed as if studying a complex puzzle. She pulled at the knot with her fingers, testing its strength. It was tight, dug deep into the wood and Tiko's swollen flesh. When her fingers failed, she leaned in, and Tiko tensed again. He expected teeth, a tearing, a final agony. Instead, he felt her powerful incisors begin to work on the rope with meticulous precision. She didn't bite at him, but at the bindings. She gnawed, she pulled, she frayed the strands, her entire focus on the single task of liberation. Saliva dripped onto his fur, warm and strange. As she worked, Zuko stood guard a few feet away, a stoic sentinel facing the outer forest. Pip, from his perch, let out a soft hoot, signaling that the woods remained clear. Another, smaller female chimp approached Tycho's head, and with a swift, decisive bite, tore the gag away. A rush of cool air filled Tycho's lungs. He could breathe. The process was painstakingly slow. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. Finally, with a loud snap, the last few fibers of the rope gave way. Tycho's body, limp and heavy, fell. But he didn't hit the ground. Another chimp had positioned himself below and broke the fall, cradling him in his arms before laying him gently on the bed of leaves. The world, for Tycho, was no longer upside down. It was a dizzying, confusing spin of green and brown, but it was right side up. And he was, impossibly, free. Freedom did not bring immediate relief. Tycho's body was a dead weight, his limbs unresponsive. The blood, thick and sluggish, began the painful journey back into his legs, a pins and needles fire that made him tremble. He was too weak to stand, too exhausted to even lift his head. He lay on the cool forest floor, a broken puppet with its strings cut. He expected the creatures to leave now, to melt back into the woods as mysteriously as they had appeared. They did not leave. Instead, they formed a circle around him. It was a silent, solemn gathering. Zuko positioned himself at the edge, a formidable barrier between their small ward and the potential dangers of the forest. The other chimps settled in, their massive forms creating a living wall of protection. Kala lay down beside Tycho, her body close but not touching, a comforting, warm presence. She began to groom him, her fingers moving with a surprising delicacy as they brushed away the dirt and dust from his white fur. Her movements were slow and rhythmic, her expression one of profound concentration. She let out a low, continuous hum, a soft, vibrating sound that seemed to seep into Tycho's very bones, calming the frantic terror in his heart. From Tycho's ground-level view, the world was transformed. The menacing, giant shapes had become a fortress of security. He watched them through half-closed eyes, his mind struggling to comprehend the impossible reality. These wild animals, these powerful beings who could have torn him apart in seconds, had chosen to show him a kindness more profound than any he had ever known from his own kind. He was no longer alone in his suffering. He was being guarded. He was being mourned. He was being protected. The low, humming chorus from the troop rose and fell in a gentle rhythm, a strange and beautiful lullaby in the heart of the wild. Miles away, Ranger Ben Carter slammed the door of his dusty Park Service Jeep. He took a long swig of water from his canteen, the cynicism leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. At 48, Ben was a man weathered by the sun and by disappointment. He'd taken this job at Redwood Valley a decade ago, hoping to escape the noise and filth of the city, seeking the clean solitude of nature. But he'd found that humanity's darkness had long fingers. The last few weeks had been particularly bad. He'd found a discarded snare wire just this morning, a sure sign of poachers. The ugliness was creeping in, poisoning his sanctuary. He began his patrol down the eastern trail, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He was about to turn back when he heard it. It wasn't the usual chatter and hooting of the valley's chimp troop. This was different. It was a low, sustained, multi-layered chorus of sounds. It wasn't a cry of alarm, nor a squabble over food. It was something else, something communal and deeply strange. It was a sound he had never heard in all his years in the park. His ranger's instincts, honed by 1,000 quiet days in the wild, screamed that something was wrong. Or, if not wrong, then profoundly unusual. A dead chimp? A birth? His mind raced through the possibilities. He unslung the tranquilizer rifle from his shoulder, holding it at a low ready, and turned off the trail, heading directly into the dense undergrowth, towards the source of the sound. The humming grew louder, more resonant, pulling him deeper into the woods, towards a clearing he knew lay just ahead. Ben moved with the practiced silence of a man who knew the forest was not his to command. He stepped over fallen logs and ducked under low-hanging branches, his senses on high alert. The humming was all around him now, a palpable vibration in the air. It wasn't threatening, but it was deeply emotional, a sound of intense, collective focus. He slowed his pace as he neared the edge of the clearing, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs. He crouched behind a large fern, its fronds providing a perfect screen, and peered through. The world stopped. For a long moment, Ben's brain simply refused to process what his eyes were seeing. The scene before him was not from a ranger's manual, it was from a myth. There, in a pool of golden afternoon light, was the park's entire chimpanzee troop. They were arranged in a near-perfect circle, their broad, dark backs facing outward. They were not foraging, not playing, not fighting. They were utterly still, like hairy, muscle-bound statues, participating in some sacred, silent ritual. And in the center of their circle, lying on a bed of carefully arranged leaves, was a small, white dog. Ben blinked, thinking the heat was playing tricks on his mind. He lowered his rifle, its weight suddenly absurd. He looked closer, his analytical mind kicking back in, trying to find a logical explanation. He saw the frayed, gnawed-at rope lying beside the dog. He saw the small, torn piece of cloth that had clearly been a gag. He saw the raw, red wounds on the dog's hind legs. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a ritual. This wasn't some strange display of animal behavior he had yet to document. This was a rescue. They had found the dog. They had freed him. And now, they were protecting him. A wave of pure, unadulterated awe washed over him, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. The cynicism that had been his constant companion for months, the weary disappointment in the cruelty of his own species, shattered into a million pieces. He had to help. Taking a deep breath, he slowly stood up and stepped out from behind the fern. The humming stopped instantly. Every head in the circle snapped in his direction. Zuko, the massive alpha, rose to his full height, letting out a low, rumbling grunt that was a clear warning, "Do not come closer." The air crackled with tension. Ben froze, raising his hands slowly, palms open, to show he was unarmed and meant no harm. He didn't reach for his rifle. He didn't move a muscle. His eyes found Kala. She had risen to a crouch beside the dog, one protective hand hovering over his small body. Their gazes locked across the clearing. In her deep, ancient eyes, Ben saw no fear and no aggression. He saw an astonishing, heart-stopping intelligence. He saw exhaustion. And he saw a question, a plea, a challenge. He saw her, in that single, silent moment, assess him, judge him, and decide whether he was one of the cruel ones or one of the kind ones. Almost involuntarily, driven by an instinct he didn't know he possessed, Ben gave a slow, single nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement. A sign of respect. A promise. "I understand. I will help." It was as if she understood. Kala let out a soft, low hoot. The tension in the circle broke. Zuko grunted again, but it was a sound of concession, and he took a step back. Slowly, with a quiet and profound dignity that stunned Ben to his core, the chimps began to move. They didn't scatter in a panic as they normally would. They turned and, one by one, melted back into the shadows of the redwood forest, their powerful forms disappearing into the green depths. Kala was the last to leave. She gave the dog one final, lingering look before turning and following her troop, and trusting the small, broken creature to the care of the man. Ben stood alone in the now silent clearing, the weight of the miracle settling upon him. He knelt beside the dog, his hand trembling as he reached for the radio on his shoulder. "This is Ranger Carter," he said, his voice cracking with an emotion he couldn't name. I need a vet team at the Old Oak Clearing. And you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you. The response was swift. Within the hour, a veterinary team from the nearby Hope Paws Sanctuary had arrived, their faces a mixture of professional focus and stunned disbelief as Ben recounted the story. They worked gently, their voices low, as if not to disturb the sanctity of the clearing. Tiko was stabilized, given water through a syringe, and carefully placed onto a stretcher. At the sanctuary, the diagnosis confirmed the miracle. The vet, a kind woman named Dr. Evans, said Tiko was suffering from severe dehydration, deep tissue damage from the ropes, and profound shock. A few more hours in that sun, she told Ben, her voice somber, and he wouldn't have made it. Whoever, or whatever, got him down, they saved his life. Ben visited every day. He sat by Tiko's enclosure as the little dog slowly regained his strength, bringing him soft food and speaking to him in a low, comforting voice. He was the one who named him Tiko, a word from a local dialect meaning, survivor. A bond formed between the man who had lost his faith in humanity and the dog who had been saved by something other than it. The story, as Ben knew it would, spread like wildfire. At first, it was just whispers among the park staff. Then Ben's official report, which he wrote with the care of a historian documenting a sacred event, was picked up by a local news blogger. From there, it went global. The pictures Ben had taken on his phone, of the empty clearing, the gnawed rope, and Tiko's wounded legs, were everywhere. Most people couldn't comprehend it. It sounded like a fairy tale, a Disney movie. But the evidence was undeniable. Tiko never returned to the deep woods. He was adopted by the sanctuary, living on a sprawling, fenced-in property that bordered the vast wilderness of Redwood Valley National Park. He was surrounded by kind hands, soft beds, and the company of other rescued animals. His wounds healed, leaving only faint scars on his legs, a permanent reminder of the cruelty he had endured and the compassion he had received. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, Ben would sit with Tiko on the grassy hill at the edge of the sanctuary. And on rare, quiet days, Tiko would suddenly go still, his ears perked, his gaze fixed on the distant, dark green wall of the forest. Ben would follow his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, he could sometimes see it, a dark, powerful silhouette high on a treetop, watching from afar. Never too close, never too far. A silent guardian, a lingering echo of a day when the line between man and beast, between savagery and civilization, had been redrawn. For Tiko, and for the silent heroes of the forest, comment respect. What does this story tell you about the nature of compassion? Share your thoughts below. Like and share this story to spread the message that kindness knows no species, and subscribe for more stories that will restore your faith in the world.